So Yoon, thank you so much for agreeing to come on and talk with me on Zoom, answer a few questions so that our membership can get to know you a little bit. You're going to be our presenter for the November 15th, 16th annual conference. And I believe your title is the Integrated Group Leader, Mindful Leadership Using Internal Family Systems and Modern Group Therapy. So my first question is, that I really like that phrase, mindful leadership, in the title. And I also noticed that you're the CEO and founder of Mindful Psychotherapy Services in New York City. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just interested to hear more about that focus of yours on being mindful and how that came to be so important to you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I live in New York City. I live pretty much, I think, New York is the most unmindful city that I can think of. And so it gives me lots of opportunities to practice just living here and practicing here. So mindful meditation was the beginning of my journey as a young person to help me wake up to feelings and thoughts and the unconscious. It was the first experience of understanding that I had thoughts that are independent from the shoulds and musts that were dictated in my childhood. And I had to learn that it's okay to have my feelings, because that's, that's something that wasn't actually validated or supported in the culture that I grew up. I was born in South Korea and moved with my family to the US when I was 8 and grew up in North Carolina, Raleigh, North Carolina. So I'm a Southerner. And by nature, I've always been curious and expressive, but the first group, which is my family, were culturally Korean and had very rigid expectations for how I was to behave, which is to be compliant and sweet, accommodating, defer to others. The only feelings that were allowed to be expressed in my family was anger, and only men and boys were entitled to that. So, so I grew up, understandably, the way that I grew up, this made me a very anxious and insecure kid. Being the only Asian immigrant kid in every class was very difficult. I had a hard time feeling like I belonged. I got made fun of. Growing up in Raleigh, there's a lot of racism. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of feelings that I had that weren't positive. And I didn't know how to make sense of it. And my family did not help me understand how to talk about it. So I got very good at denying feelings and directing it inward. So my only source of learning about the world was the library and books, and that's how I learned about life and the world. And as you know, college, so when I got to college, and college is when you start beginning to feel free to explore, your identity independent from family. A lot of the whole can of worms started, sort of kind of opened up, and a lot of the buried feelings and thoughts that I had that I got good at, denying, sort of opened up, and, not surprising, I became symptomatic and started having panic attacks.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. And then, I went back to what I used to cope, which is, the library and the books. And I found a book on mindful meditation.
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, just completely clueless, having panic attacks, couldn't sleep. There's no way that I was going to pick up a book on psychotherapy, because that's not, that wasn't something that my family was open to, or, there was a lot of stigma around that. So meditation and mindfulness was really helpful for me, because when I started meditating, I realized that I had these thoughts and feelings, and that I could be with these thoughts and feelings without judging them.
Wow.
And it really helped to begin to lay down the foundation for becoming more curious about my unconscious.
Right. No wonder it's such a foundational piece of your work. And yes, thank you for sharing that amazing, story of how it came to be. I love that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it was really the ground from which everything else grew from, the mindfulness meditation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you're really covering internal family systems in your talk with us, and I found it when I read the book "Body Keeps the Score"
Mm-hmm.
by
Mm-hmm.
Bessel van der Kolk, and have really loved learning about it. Can you tell us more about what drew you to that and what you like about it?
Yeah, so, I think as group therapists and as therapists, our job is to create a safe, inviting container for our patients. And that takes a tremendous effort from the therapist, because in order to help other people heal, the therapist has to understand and own and accept their own unconscious or conscious thoughts and feelings that might be difficult to tolerate. And I think that means that we have to willingly expose ourselves in a controlled manner to our own unwanted thoughts and feelings, so that we can make room to be with those difficult, dysregulated feelings from our patients. So what, early in my training, I was part of a Center for Group Studies weekend training program. My attempt to expose myself to become a better therapist, I tried the Center for Group Studies. So, and the people in the group had all kinds of feelings toward me, that weren't positive, sometimes warm, but I was surprised and confused by some of the reactions that I got, something like, you're intellectualizing, or you're being aggressive. And I'm like, just completely clueless. I had no idea what they're talking about. Like, these are all things that are really helpful. And then around the same time, I started training in internal family systems, which helped me understand what those parts were, like that we have multiple parts of us that protect us from early childhood wounds. Yeah. And
Absolutely.
so I started to understand how to work and develop a relationship with these different parts of me, and to help to be receptive to the group feedback, and really become curious about what may be getting in the way of connection.
That's cool. Oh, absolutely. And
Yeah.
how can you give us an example of how you blend the internal family systems with the modern group piece?
Yeah, I think that what was really interesting is, I just recently, Elliot Zeisel was asked if, when I was talking about this and blending the two, he asked me if I knew what modern group therapy meant, like what modern meant, and I had no idea. And all this time, and he said, well, modern group therapy is basically it's an evolving model that incorporates any technique that helps to resolve resistance. And I think that's why internal family systems and modern group therapy, or modern group therapy with any other technique that helps to understand and resolve resistance, is helpful. So I think it goes together because of how open the modern group technique is.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, to incorporating other techniques.
Right. Looking for the things that work, and doing those things, and kind of developing technique around it. Absolutely.
That's right. Yeah. And also what both internal family systems and modern group therapy have in common is that they they're both techniques that really value and respect and honor the defenses. Like
Right.
we have parts and defenses and resistances for a reason. And it's very important to join and understand and develop relationship with those resistances until the patient is ready to give them up.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that before, but I do think that's what spoke to me so much about IFS because I'd done all this training in modern group work, and the honoring of the defense and making sure that step doesn't get passed over, before of understanding all that it has done for us, right? All through the years. Oh, that's wonderful. I hadn't thought of that. Cool.
Yeah, and internal family systems has a really interesting way of providing a language and naming those, like what moderns call resistance, as parts. Mm-hmm. And to understand the history, each part has its own beliefs and feelings and the reasons and its job, like where it got this job. Like I started to intellectualize when I felt confused about what was happening. And this thinking part of me was a very acceptable way to connect, because I didn't know how to connect emotionally.
Right. Clever, helpful. Yeah, got the job.
Helpful. Yeah, my family were, they were okay with it. And now as an adult, it's, what the group training helps to do is people have reactions to that, because it is also now this part of me becomes a way of distancing and disconnecting or dealing with anxiety. And I can actually, using IFS, work with this part of me to ask it to give me some space and to trust that I can actually connect emotionally, and it's going to be okay, and that people are going to actually respond well to that. And others may be different from my parents, and they're not going to, judge me for having feelings the same way that, right. That was judged as a child. So it's really very interesting. And I'm not sure, like, in terms of, in the 2-day training, I'll be teaching certain concepts that will help people understand how to use certain techniques of IFS in group. Right. But IFS is a 3-year program, and I don't expect for people. I think it's too much pressure to think that in 2 days that you'll understand the entire model. But hopefully, it'll give people an understanding of how to see themselves and other people in group differently.
Absolutely, and a really good taste of what the language is around it and how you use it and some of the concepts. That'll be really helpful for people. I'm glad. I was just wondering what, from your perspective, are some of the biggest challenges for you in leading groups?
Yeah, I think it's so funny. It's a good question. So first of all, I find groups are very exposing. Yeah. There's no way to hide. There's multiple people just looking and watching and reacting to you. So it's very exposing.
Yes.
And I think as a group leader, I tend to feel a lot of pressure to be helpful, mm-hmm. or to manage the conflicts.
Right.
Also to worry about people not getting hurt. Those are very, or if people get too dysregulated, really, there's a part of me that starts to manage that, which is not a great thing, because managing groups, it's not, and being helpful is really a few of the worst things I could do as a therapist most of the time. And I know this intellectually, but when I'm in the moment, it's like these parts come up, like old habits. And what I realized over time is that all of these parts, really are a reaction to a wanting to be liked, and also from an, kind of an old exile of not being enough or not having enough to offer. Mm-hmm. And you know, the more I work on that young part of me that feels like I don't have enough or I'm not enough, the less I need to manage and be helpful. And yeah, and you know, as group leaders, we're choosing to expose ourselves to a lot of feelings that are really kind of activate our own systems and create overreactions, almost like an allergic reaction.
Oh, I like thinking of it that way.
Yeah, and working to integrate these different reactive parts of us and understanding and developing a relationship with our resistances or defenses helps to build the trust within our own system, and it helps kind of produce the appropriate sort of antibodies to become less sensitive and reactive to what's happening in the group and stay present with whatever is coming up and to meet whatever is coming up with compassion and clarity and awareness.
Absolutely. Yeah. So much to be allergic to in a group.
So much to be allergic to. And every group leader has like their special thing they're really allergic to.
Very good way of thinking about it. So we can kind of wrap up. I so appreciate you know, the answers to your questions, and am wondering, you know, you told me you've been to Austin before, so now I know. Is there anything you're looking forward to doing while you're here in November?
You know, you know, the reason how I got involved with modern, with Elliot training group and continue to do this is because of my first or second Center for Group Studies weekend where I met Jeff Hudson, and he, you know, I think he felt sorry for me. Just like a long, I think it was 2008, 2009, and I just became sort of like psychological brother to me. And I always associate Austin to like my brother from North Carolina. Oh. You know, because Jeff is also from North Carolina, and
oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, isn't that? It's fantastic, and I have warm feelings towards a lot of the other group Center for Group Studies people from Austin. So I'm really looking forward to seeing everyone.
Yeah.
And also, I associate food with like.
Of course.
And so like I'm really excited to eat barbecue and like collard greens.
Of course you are.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. You're doing the right thing. So
I'm doing the right things. And there's like, Austin's wonderful. I mean, it's such an exciting city, and there's an energy, the fresh energy there that's really, that I don't feel anywhere else. So I'm really excited to go back, and really grateful that I'm being invited to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it won't be long. You're going to be here very soon, November 15th and 16th. So for anyone listening to this video, just go to the austingroups.org website and sign up. You don't want to miss this conference. Thank you so much, Yoon.
Thank you, Pam. Take care.